There was a couple of things I wanted just to kick things off with. I mean, one was a little bit around the title. You know, you were never big on luxuries, and we sort of saw where it came from the poem. But I just wondered if you could say a wee bit about why you chose that. I suppose, you know, particularly for the title of the film, and also what were your ambitions for this film? What did you want to achieve by making the film?
Well, the opportunity arose, as Eamon says at the end. It was done on a very small budget. It was 5,000 euros, which was available. So really, we were making that out of. We were a sort of privileged position, but had some footage from particularly Aftermath. We had some from Declan Keeney and such like. But so we were able then to use the money on the other additional filming we had to do. I mean, I like Jerry Kelly's poems, you know, and I think it's sort of subversive. Jerry Kelly, if people don't know him, he's a former IRA prisoner and took part in his escape, and he's a very high profile. I think he's more of a poet than a politician. I think he writes brilliant poetry, and I think the fact is and I'd say, the comments at the end there about breaking down. He was force fed for a long time in England. He was charged with bombing the Old Bailey, and then they went on hunger strike to get moved back. And a few others, and they were moved back. But I particularly like that, talking about his mother, because one mother died about less than 2 years after the hunger strike. I would say the hunger strike probably added till any issues of health. And also it reflects probably the type of people I'm talking about, which is working class people on the ground, and particularly, or just mothers with fathers as well. Like, didn't have luxuries. So just like I particularly like the poem in that sentence. You're never big on luxuries. As if you could have luxuries. She had, like, what was it, mint sweets and sort of coffee with milk in it. But also because Jerry's writings came from the prison as well, which is where mine would have begun. So yeah, I just like the. Like that title, and we wanted some bother to get his actual handwriting.
I could tell that.
It took a long technical process to get that sort of done out,
Right.
So.
And there was one comment in it that was a wee bit throwaway that I wondered if you had any insight on it. It's Cillian Ford, and he was talking about the effect of the conflict on the South in particular, and he said rather elliptically, I thought, or enigmatically, he says the effect of it was we never grew up in the South, and he sort of seemed to see that this is an ongoing thing as well. It wasn't in the past. Do you have a sense of what he was meaning there?
Well, Cillian, it was at that time the CEO of the Integration Centre, who he worked with as part of the Aftermath project. They deal with immigration, migration, refugees. They're now amalgamated with another group, and Cillian now works abroad as one of the aid organisations. I think what it sounds really, and someone mentioned it this morning, it's not just in England mentioned something about the North. I think sometimes the South could be worse, because you've got to remember you had a period of censorship of about 30 years, like an actual censorship law, which meant that Sinn Féin spokespeople couldn't appear on TV and their voices couldn't be heard, even if they weren't even speaking about Sinn Féin. There was a famous case about Larry O'Toole, who was a trade union leader, and whenever the factory that he worked in went on strike, he wasn't allowed to speak about the strike, even though he was the shop steward. And that real revisionism period and such, like, and actually it's only now, I think, particularly this centenary of commemorations, which I think it caused a lot of problems for the government, and you could see that in the real ham-fisted way they tried to, last year, to me, bizarrely construct. Like, they made a video which had the Queen in it, had Ian Paisley in it, had Bono in it, didn't have anything about the signatories of the proclamation in 1916, and you're saying, like, because they brought in an outside company to do it, so it shows you the sort of, it's not just amnesia, it's just a total, I'd say ignorance in many ways. People just not having that sort of knowledge. Like the example I said earlier about the young girl who said, "Look, I've read this book," and teacher saying, "No, we don't want to hear that." And that's relatively short time ago. So I think what he was saying, that not growing up, they didn't grow with the knowledge of what was happening, of whether they agree or disagree, and it's only there was like a blanket pulled down. And I think they lost out as a result of that there. Literally the fact of partition. And I think it is interesting now, that centenary of commemorations, because whilst there's a focus now on 1916, as they continue on until the War of Independence and right up to partition. Partition still exists. 1916 Rising happened and was an event, and it's gone. Partition still exists, and what has been the effect of that in terms of, well, everything, cross-border cooperation, knowledge, history, whatever, you know. So I think that's what Killian was getting at, being sort of political activist as well. So you know, yeah, I think that's what was. Yeah, and I think it was great that it was. I mean, the exhibition was, and that was the reason of using arts to raise a lot of those issues. Because sometimes if you mention, you know, dealing with the past, oh God, here we go again, you know, and it's, you know, it's boring. But to have it in the gallery of photography, and we had it in Belfast Expos. I think it was one of Pauline's last projects, or if I remember right, when it was been held there, and held there at the time of the Haas talks and such like. So you're taking into a new space and totally new audience, and as Trish Lamb, the creator, said about Luke Gibbons and launching it again, it's it's taking it into a whole new arena of people who wouldn't normally engage with the North, because it's like, oh God, keep it away there, you know. And it's actually saying, well, here's these people, you know, they're photographs here, they're here, and it's former RUC men with former IRA men with families that have disappeared with, and you're actually saying they can come together to do these things. So that was.
Thank you. That's useful to know. There's a couple of things I wanted to pick up, and this is partly also picking up from the conversations earlier today as well. And this whole notion of unheard voices and untold stories really intrigues me. I was thinking of it was this very small piece of work that two artists worked on, Maura Donaldson and Jerry Moriarty. It was called Small Acts of Resilience. It's 2 or 3 years ago now, and they started working with little groups of people from different communities. I'm not even sure where, but in and around Belfast, and you know, started conversations with people, and mostly their first response was, "Oh, sure, what do you want to talk to me about? I have nothing to say. I have nothing interesting to contribute." And then the other response was, "Oh, well, yeah. I mean, the trouble is, it didn't really affect us that much." And then, of course, as they talk and discuss, of course it did, and of course they have fascinating things to say, but they're very small acts of resilience. These are, you know, really very, very small indeed. And it chimes in with Roger's idea this morning of the grief in the kitchen. And I was thinking, yes, but we also have this sort of idea of catharsis, you know, particularly that's a very relevant term coming from sort of theatrical terminology, and this sort of the role of getting stories into the public domain. I don't know where this question's going, but it was something. It's a point, it's not a question. We'll make it a question. Right. There's something that Jerry Kelly also said at the end there, and it really struck me, and he said, it's not so much that stories are unheard, it's that they're not engaged with. And I thought that was interesting. So it's the stories are there. It's in a sense that applies to me as whether we choose to hear them or not, or whether we choose to engage with them or not. And I just wondered if, you know, given what you heard this morning and a lot of the stuff we've heard from the film, do you have any further reflections on that that'll be useful to us?
Well, I think I know what am I still here? Roger ended his contribution this morning, and I know we're already run behind time, but I wanted to come back in, because I think there is a thing about people, well, the demands of victim survivors, and you're in the whole issue of, well, who is a victim survivor. I mean, it becomes massive in terms of, you talk about who has been affected, and where it's psychologically, physically, emotionally, whatever else. But yeah, I think there are real needs, as in physical or financial, but I think for a lot of people it is actually trying to understand what happened. And I think there was a period where people needed to tell their own story. And I know you're saying that the play that myself and Brian did in 2003 called it The Cold House didn't go down well in the Republican community. We got away with it probably because we were ex-prisoners and former hunger strikers. So, but it was saying, like, if this is a process we're on, then this is what we need to deal with. And I mean, on the night it opened in White Rock. It was Pam Brighton, who also worked with the BBC as a radio plays. And there was a sort of polite applause and all the rest of it. There was one woman who came up to me after me whose husband had been shot dead by the British Army in Ballymurphy. And she says, like, a number of times I wanted, because we did meet with former RUC men, senior ones, before we had this. I can remember vividly having a meeting in a restaurant. It's always amazing how I think people talk over food, you know, and say things that they wouldn't normally, you know, what is even a cup of tea and a muffin. And the guy was literally shaking across from us. Early man, he had been an assistant chief constable, and the meeting was facilitated by, probably won't mention his name, but I mentioned Brandon McAllister, who worked with Mediation Network, Mediation NI. And the man says, I just see you as criminals, you know, terrorists, and that's fine. I mean, we know we're not going to say anything. Otherwise, we said, we're writing this, we want to hear, you know, I mean, your actual feelings, your thoughts, tell us them, and we will faithfully reflect that. They also met with the guy who's Harry Simon, who got lost both arms in a RPG attack, and now works as a psychologist largely with former RUC, but also others. Who was great again and telling us all the sort of giving us information. So we did we reflected it in the play, so people didn't like to hear this RUC and what he was saying and about picking up bodies in a plastic bag. And this girl Margaret, she said, like, a number of times I wanted to shout up at him, I'll fucking tell you how it was when I tell you. And then she says, I thought, well, if we're really serious about this process, then I have to hear this, difficult as it is. And I think there was that parade of people going through it, and now I think there's almost like a curiosity to hear what the other side has to say and where did they come from, and even if it's maybe uncomfortable to start to hear it. And I think the minute that goes on is amazing. I mean, Alan McBride, whose wife and father-in-law were killed in the Shanghai Road bombing, which was IRA bombing. I know Alan well, we speak on different panels together. He launched the Aftermath project in Dundalk. He'll be speaking this week at the anniversary of the Dublin bombings, which was carried out by loyalists and British agents. So the amount of sort of people come together, and they still have their own story of what happened, but I do want to hear the other. And a fascinating thing about 2 months ago on the local radio, BBC Radio Ulster, was this former pilot of the British Army who got shot down over South Armagh. And he wanted to come and meet the guy who shot him down. So he met with Martin McGuinness, who told me he couldn't really put him in touch with anybody like that there. But he found it great. Martin was very welcoming. Up in him and his wife had travelled over. They were up in Stormont. He went down to South Armagh. He met with a friend of mine, Thomas Marin, who's an ex-prisoner. And now accepted it probably was a bit naive in his part to meet the person who shot him down because he was never charged with it, so therefore it might be a wee bit dodgy. But that's the way he spoke about that time, and he loved being in South Armagh and how well he was treated, and the importance of hearing his story, because he was saying, like, it was a war. And the IRA was a very professional, dedicated army, and we were up against them. And he says, I can see why they're looking at me coming from another country into their country. And I think you're getting more and more of that. Like, people can still accept that they were right, whatever they did, whether they were British Army, loyalist, Republican, but. Yeah, I want to hear where the other side comes from, and that's why I think that the arts in particular has facilitated that when there hasn't been a dialogue going on at a political level. And I think probably now to this extent. And yes, okay, it's said this morning it's the same sort of election results and all the rest, that I don't necessarily, by the way, see that as a bad thing. I mean, in some sense it's stability, and there's a lot of movement going on below the scenes, but I think in terms of on-the-ground peace process, the amount of activity that has gone on in interactions is phenomenal, I think, compared to what it had been. And I think this, so I think that's the importance of the arts in its different forms. I think particularly with theatre, like someone can go in and identify with a character who they would probably never meet on the streets, wouldn't like if they met, and yet they find themselves actually sympathising with them, and find that sort of bizarre. I mean, remember, those you pass in the street when I went on tour again this year, it opened in Bangor, which would be a fairly middle-class Protestant sort of area. A lot of students would have been drama students, but the rest were it's a new theatre. Like one of the ones there was Basil McRae, who's a unionist elected one. I mean, he went on Facebook immediately afterwards and sang the praises of this year because he didn't believe work like this was being done, where he could identify with one of the characters in the play. He was so I think it's great. And then if you're having discussion after it, you know. And
Well, that's what I wanted to ask, if we stick with theatre for a minute or two, because one of the phrases that really annoys me, I have to say, that a few people came in the film, is it brings people together. And it only, not necessarily, it kind of hasn't annoyed me in this context before, but it has annoyed me, particularly in a lot of my research with refugees. So there's a lot of refugee festivals and things like that, and they're great because they bring people together, you know, and it's rather, it's just a little bit too easy, I think, in some ways. But on the other hand, I was thinking about the I want to say sort of non-traditional theatrical aspects. So as I understand it, I've not seen it, but the Two Roads West, you know, involves people getting into a taxi and observing a conversation at very close quarters, I imagine. And I was actually thinking about, it made me think about the wedding play, the community play, where people, this was 2004, I think, actually a good while back, where literally it was a mixed marriage situation, and so people were taken from the city centre in minibuses to watch the preparations for this wedding. And then I was thinking also about you say like the post-show discussion. I mean, when I hear post-show discussion, often my heart sinks. But I imagine that this was rather different from most post-show discussions. So I wondered if you could just say a little bit about that, kind of the form of theatre, I suppose, and the way that it is more than just the idea of bringing people together. If they watch a play and go home again, to me, that's not brought them together at all. So how does theatre function in that, in those, using those non-traditional formats? I wonder if you just say a bit more about that.
Yeah, I'm not such a great expert on all of theatre, all of the things I've written about. I think I mean, it's often end up the discussion has been much longer than the play, and not necessarily because a couple of people have dominated the discussion. I think what Cabois does, particularly Paula, is brilliant at is they're site specific, so that's what they're really into. I know in terms of Two Roads West, where you didn't have the post show, but which was amazing. Yes, it takes place in a taxi. The guy's a driver. What's amazing is the number of people who buy the ticket to go to it, and then they start talking to the actors. You know, the actor says, "No, I remember that there," and they go, "Yes, do you remember the band they used to play?" And somebody's like, you know, the wife or the husband said, "She said, no, I'm not. She just said blah blah blah." You know? So it's it totally blurs the line from one to the other, and it was recreated for Derry for the City of Culture, and again, they're just totally rewritten for that. But and it's amazing that out of the refusal, probably about the thought I started might have been people who were maybe visitors or whatever go to it, but probably about 60% of them would have been people who are from Belfast, and who had never been across Norway. No. And the funny incident when we were doing the dress rehearsal, our taxi broke down outside the King Billy mural, and I'm sitting in the back of it. And there's panic in the thing, and I'm saying, I just phoned Tom Roberts in charge of UVF prisoners, and he comes down and give me a lift if I need be, because I work with these people. So even in terms of the difference that's happened in the city in the meantime, whenever that was happening, I think for the other, I suppose any day without sounding immodest, it's about what characters are in it and how you make it. I mean, the play about those you pass in the street is roughly based. It's based on a real incident, which a guy in the Sinn Féin Centre said to me years ago about how a widow in our UC man had come in and he recognised her, and she was looking help with trouble around her area, and he went out and of course and helped her, and made sure everything was done. I just thought it was intriguing that someone would do that, as in when, I mean, it's obviously take a lot of courage or whatever else. So that's where when the opportunity came, because it was Helen to Remember who commissioned the piece to do it, and basically I had a free run to do whatever I wanted. I knew then that because I was the one writing it, I ended up making the RUC man a Catholic, so a sister is a Catholic, who's the one who's a bit who probably gave us the hardest line, but it meant that because we had been a Protestant unionist, then you're open to that's why you depict unionist and Protestant, you know. Where actually the widow is a Protestant, she says her background as a Protestant, and so on and so forth. And I think that part of that then totally changes the whole thing upside down a bit, because it's not the Irish one's not Protestant, you know, with now Catholic, the woman who's given off, and then there's two other guys, and one's in Sinn Féin, and another guy's brother who has. I'll not tell the story in case people go to watch it, but it does a bit of a twist in it, which I think takes people by surprise, and it is amazing how people start to have sympathy for someone who they wouldn't previously have sympathy. And again, I think the thing is about like where we ended. There's no fancy tied up like Hollywood style ending. It's like, and we spent ages on the ending, and the ending was literally, at what point does he turn? Does she turn and face him? Whatever, because it's left. It's nothing about dealing with the past. If you're going to go down that road, then it's going to raise issues. It's going to raise issues for you, for your family, for your friends, for your community, to the point where, I'm talking about Alan McBride earlier, he's probably more welcome now in nationalist areas than some unionist areas, because people don't want to hear that you are prepared to go and meet these other people or whatever. So I think I've probably gone totally off what your question was, but I think if it's done, and the play is done very simply with very little props, as you see part of it there. So really, and it's very short, as in people coming in and out, but it's looking at very ordinary social domestic situations, but then this big issue, and really it's about do you move forward, and what's the implications of doing it, or do you just remain safe, which is what one of the main character talks about. You know, it's like reading a book. You can read an old book and it's sort of comforting and all the rest of it, but it does not tell you know the ending, you know the plot, you know the characters, and I think a lot of things we like dealing with the past is that they're preferable not. Let's just keep it the way it is. It's what we know about, because to hear new elements or introduce it is going to have some big implications on our life.
Changing the subject completely, if I might. I was thinking about as I was saying in your very brief biography, the fact that you did your degree in prison through Open University, and I can think of at least 2 other people I've met who've done a similar, similar path. So I was thinking about that, and then I was thinking about something that Roger again said this morning, that 95% of children in Northern Ireland are still in segregated education, and the story you told about the girl reading your book. And I don't know, I wonder, is it overstating it to say that, that part of, maybe one of the elephants in the room here is the education system? Do you think? Is that be fair to say, or is there more that can be said about that?
I mean, I know people often talk about integrated education, and yes, I would prefer that education was that way, where kids were mixed. I have 2 daughters of my own. They're now late teenage years. They did all their early education through the Irish medium, and then from secondary school on went till what would be a Catholic school, but they were never baptised or never had confirmation or never had anything else. And the irony is they excel at religious education, even though the teacher has to sometimes go, okay, yes, we all know why there's no female priest or and all the rest of it, but let's stop there. To me, I think it's more about it's about the parents and what happens there and what happens in wider society, because yes, we're going to introduce to more diversity, and I think they are changing more, because even within their school, in terms of both skin colour and religion, there's already a change. There's a lot of changes because schools have had to amalgamate and such like. I remember years ago doing a talk for this group of secondary school teachers, and they were fighting in speakers, so it was to be about the hunger strike and about jail and all the rest of it. It was held over in Newcastle, in the north, Slieve Donard, lovely setting. So I told the story, and it was amazing because we took a few questions then very quickly, and 2 of the questions that really stood out for me. Do you think, Laurence, you weren't loved as a child? Your parents didn't love you? And the other was, do you think the education system failed you? And I says, no, I had a great, idyllic upbringing until about 12. The civil rights and shit started at the fan. And education, I loved education. I excelled at 11 plus and such like. And it was almost then like, well, this is then unfathomable. Like, how could you end up doing what you did? There had to be some real sort of reason. I think sometimes there's that in the north looking for, oh, it must be the education, or if we could just get them together, then that would. I mean, you could go to integrated school and come out of it, and later on end up in, whatever else you end up in, because it's going to be how society is. I think it's the same thing about segregated housing, and on part of that piece of research I talked about this morning, gender at interviews. I interviewed Margaret Ward, who would be very prominent in women's organisations and who I've known for years. And she said, like, she lives in what would be seen as a very sort of middle class, leafy suburbs, and very mixed. But she says, like, do we integrate with neighbours? No, but we feel it's okay to tell people in working class communities that they should integrate together. And I think it's important people can feel firstly safe in their own area. Then I think they'll have the confidence to go out and meet other people. But if they don't feel safe, then they're not going to have that confidence going out. So I think it is a slow process. Yes, ideally if people were integrated better, but rather than seeing it as some panacea for conflict, I don't think it is.
Great.